Hello and welcome to Insight Live, the IT Experts Take. Today we're going to be talking about creating psychological safety during your next workshop, and we've got a couple of rock stars here that are going to help us talk about this. We have Ryan Stryker from Insight. He's one of our national architects in our user experience group. We have Jim Kalbach, who's the chief evangelist at MURAL, and we have John West, who is senior director for MURAL Professional Network, and I'm Jason Rader, your host, Insight's CISO. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, great to be here.
Now, and I was just talking as we were in the green room before we got started, this is something that gets me pretty excited. I really love this aspect of things. And after looking at the background, prepping for this, I'm pretty sold on it. So I'm really excited to kind of have this conversation. Why don't we kick it off by, for the uninitiated, we typically go heavy tech in a lot of these conversations. So why don't we talk about what psychological safety means? What's kind of the construct that we're going to be talking about here? And feel free, anybody.
Yeah, it's a great question, Jason. I think the way I look at it is, it's a blend of these great social sciences. As we look at technology, we look at people, and we're trying to figure out how do we get the best out of our teams, right? How do you move towards innovation? And I think one of the things we're finding is that showing up and be able to contribute authentically, being engaged. And when we're getting together for collaboration, we all moved remote for the most part a few years ago. And we had to figure out how do we meet together, and not have some of those touch points that we see in the office, but still get to great outcomes. And so the topic of psychological safety has been really interesting for me, where I like to think of, typically those four typical stages of psychological safety, right? Like we have inclusion. So I feel included as a human being. I have every right to be a part of what we're doing. Then we start moving up a little bit where it's also, I feel safe to also be learning while doing, without anybody, coming down on me or any pressures. It's okay to make mistakes. And then, our last two, really, I'm safe to contribute. Like, I can bring my experiences, especially if you think of like diversity and inclusion, like what is my background? Where do I come from in the organization? Who am I just as a human being? And I can contribute. So we have, diversity in ideas and backgrounds. And lastly, that I can challenge things, right? I can say, I disagree. Maybe we can look at this problem a different way. Or as a facilitator, even getting feedback then, be like, hey, Ryan, I don't know if you really landed the plane in that last session. I have some feedback for you, and taking that as like positive intent to get better. So I think it's becoming one of the core traits of leaders, whether you're talking about facilitation or not. But just as we try to move forward, bringing in more focus on humans inside of tech.
Anybody want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think as things like creativity and innovation become more core to our business and driving business results, right? Then the human aspect, as Ryan was describing, comes to the fore. And there is this notion of safety. I love the word, psychological safety, because if you think of the other side of that, there is fear on the other side. And believe it or not, there are people in your teams who are afraid to speak up and give their opinion or contradict people, right? And then you take a look at, techniques like agile development, which is all about learning, right? That you do a retrospective so you can learn. If people are afraid to contribute to the retrospectives, you're not going to have, agile doesn't work unless people feel safe to speak up, right? And that's really what we're talking about, that human aspect of how are you driving business results through creativity and innovation by being more inclusive, allowing people to speak without the fear of reprimand. So that's the thing. People hold back their opinions, and we see this over and over again. People will hold back their opinions, their thoughts, because they fear that they're going to be ridiculed or embarrassed or even reprimanded as well too. So the idea of psychological safety and making it explicit is how can we create an environment where it is more equitable and people can contribute.
Love it. And I think, does this obviously, I don't know that we were super successful putting everybody in front of whatever platform we happen to align with and shoving them in and going, all right, use this thing. Now we're remote. It's there's obviously got to be some buy-in at the senior leadership level from a business perspective. The leaders have to be educated from a value perspective. In our organization, with the transformation we're going through and all of the additional training things, it's built into kind of our DNA at this point. But what kind of things have to happen to organizations, even if you put the greatest platform, what has to happen kind of from an executive level and on down? Anyone? Maybe aligned to a framework or something along those lines?
I think for me, it's the idea that innovation is like multidisciplinary. And, I think you see a lot of times like, oh, you have an innovation team or you have an innovation hub, or innovation is relegated to these like innovation days. And, I was looking at some interesting studies that were talking about, the state of innovation and how satisfied most of our, larger Fortune 500 organizations are with their innovation efforts. And, according to some of the information I was reading from Harvard Business Review, they were talking about like most of the C-suite recognizes that we could be better at innovation. And in the studies I was reading, the one thing that people back was the tiny habits that they need within their workday. And what I think needs to come from, all the way up and from down is the idea that innovation can come from anyone at any time. And that I think the skills we need to be promoting amongst our teams are teaching them these social sciences, these things that Luma does so well, that, John can talk to about the ideas of like, there's one thing to create a template or to say, hey, we're going to do this method and we're all going to do this activity together. But there's a lot that goes into it to even realizing like, oh, this is a great method to get people talking, to get the answers we need. So for me, I think the big thing is recognizing that we need to give the skills to everyone across the organization to be innovative. Mm-hmm. And I think that takes some training, some time investment and things to give people those skills to be innovative in their day to day. Because when I think about the different types of innovation, right? Like we like to think about disruptive, we like to think about radical, like something completely new, creates a new market. But I think there's a lot of innovation that's just incremental or just, slightly emerging, where it's like, we're slightly moving something forward, we're continuing to provide value to our customers, but it might not just be this complete wow thing. So I think helping people understand that there are many people components and there's a lot of social sciences that go into helping us move forward towards innovation. Like it's not just the new technology that comes out, but for me, it's empowering everybody to feel they can own and take part in innovation and giving them the skills to be able to rally others around their ideas and move them forward.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I was, I guess what I was maybe asking is, maybe all the leaders do know that innovation is the way that they're going to move the needle at this point. And how do we evoke that? How do we enable that within our organizations? And you mentioned Luma. John, why don't you fill us in a little bit about that?
Sure. So Luma was founded about 12, 13 years ago, really with the, inspired by the mission and the belief that all people can be capable of design. They could be good designers, regardless what it says on your business card, what your title is. We can all be better at this practice that has existed for, many decades, centuries in some cases. And that we can be better at the job that we have if we could employ some of these techniques that have been in practice in the design profession for so long. And so it's an attempt to generalize those skills so that they are relevant to people that don't consider themselves designers. If you're an engineer, HR, supply chain, whatever operations, you can be better at that work if you can learn some of these techniques. And organizations can benefit when they teach everybody in their organization how to do this, because it provides a common language for collaborative problem solving, right? And that's really important when you talked about, well, what do leaders need to get right if they want this to happen in their organizations? It relates to shared belief. It relates to shared practices and skills. It relates to shared tools and other instruments that we use to do the work. And the point isn't just that we are agreeing to use those things. We're all using the same things. But when we have that agreement, then those things tend to just disappear. And we can then focus on the work. And that's what happens when you get agreement. Economies agree on a currency, then they can forget about the currency and just get into commerce, right? If we can agree on a language, we can stop negotiating over words and we can just exchange ideas, right? When we agree on the gauge of railroad tracks, we can forget about like those kinds of challenges and focus on moving materials from one place to another, right? And so agreeing on a language for problem solving skills, practices, tools, and things like that, all of a sudden those things recede into the background and we can just focus on working well with each other, solving big problems. And so that's the benefit of that agreement, is it lets us focus on the stuff that matters.
Love it. And so, Jim, Mural has created a platform that basically enables this.
Correct.
Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think why psychological safety is kind of bubbling up right now, and why it has a different type of relevance, I think, is in the post-pandemic world, a lot of things shifted as we know, and a lot of the human dynamics that we were talking about, the ability to speak up and the trust that you had with your colleagues and things like that, a lot of that was given by the physical office place. Right. And I think the big question mark and the thing that's got people scratching their heads is, well, if we're not going back to the office and all of our meetings are mediated like this, right? What does culture mean? How do I build trust? Where's the hierarchy? Even just things like turn taking. How do we take turns? To John's point about, common language. Suddenly we have to reinvent that. And I think the key word, one of the messages that I heard in what John was talking about, is being intentional. That it's not just going to happen at the water coolers and in the meeting rooms, is that we have to be very deliberate about the language and the rules of engagement that we're giving our teams for those creative problem solving challenges that they have, right? And it's a lot of that intentionality that's going to give rise to psychological safety in this new world. So the technology that we're using now to collaborate in a hybrid or whatever we call this post-pandemic world, it kind of changes, I think, how leaders have to approach then developing trust and a sense of belonging to the team, and including all their other voices. And that's what I think Luma is a methodology. What Mural is a virtual whiteboard. It's a space. It's the space in which you can collaborate, and you can do that in a very visual way, and you can do that in a very playful way. And we know that play disarms fear. Right. That if you're in this environment that is itself more welcoming, and in that environment you're following these rules of engagement, you'll get the type of contribution that you're looking for, and you'll get the psychological safety that is needed to innovate.
Love it. I mean, even when you're together, I mean, usually there's some kind of icebreaker that's formalized in just about every environment, and being able to do those kinds of things from a whiteboard perspective is it gets you, how long do we have to kind of sit around before we actually start to get to work? How long does it take for us to know each other? And so having something that allows that to jumpstart that and to, define how we do that, I think it gets us that much farther faster.
Correct. Absolutely right.
And Jason, I'm super glad you brought that up, because for me, big time extrovert, learn to facilitate, workshops in person, research in person. Everything was very in person for me, and we switched, with the pandemic. And so thankful, to find a tool like Mural. But what's interesting is all those little touch points, those things you learn about being in the room, shaking hands, small talk, getting people used to being in the room. They're already a little afraid. Like, what are you testing me? Like, what methods are we going to do? I don't do this. One of the things that was super interesting for me is over the last few years, just our industry, Jason, is like, I may be doing a workshop on an AR VR project. Next, it may be for like an analytics, transformation. Then I might be jumping in on a mobile app. Like, it's hard to tell where I may be helping facilitate a session. And oftentimes I get people who have, very low experience with technology, let alone coming in. I have to go to a shared computer. I have this new tool, Mural, that Ryan's telling me I have to go use. I'm nervous about, like, we're doing some kind of workshop. I've got peers in here. So there's just a lot to overcome just in that initial, hey, you belong here. I'm going to teach you these new tools. It's okay to make mistakes. So it was interesting, right? It was very different than I hand somebody a marker in a Post-it note and say, okay, hey, here's what we're going to do. It's like some of my workshops, I send pre videos on how to use Mural. I try to do those things, but like the first little bit of any workshop, a lot of the methods I'm doing are like, they seem kind of goofy. You're like, Ryan, why are we doing this thing where like maybe we're decorating an avatar of ourselves, of like our hobbies or like what we might look like? Or I'll move them something a little more serious where it's like, okay, guys, we want to create some agreements as a team. Like, what do we want to do about videos and restroom breaks? And if you need to step away, and they're adding things. And what I think a lot of people don't realize is they're learning the tool by doing something fun, and it allows them to kind of disassociate that, like, oh, there is work coming. There are these methods I'm going to engage in, but like all of a sudden we're talking, we're sharing, we're getting used to the tool, and you have this engagement. And I think that's one of the things that I think is so different from going remote to, going from in-person remote, is like, you also have to foster just the fact that like, internet may go, you're gonna maybe interrupt each other, these things are gonna happen, and getting that to be able to even move towards the activities you want to get to. But those things are so important now.
I mean, I was just talking, I think from a leadership perspective, leaders know the gold that is below them, or they should, right? And one of the problems that I have, especially when I'm with other leaders, when we get a bunch of VPs in a room, it's one of those things where I have a big personality and I know it, right? I don't want to stifle everybody else, but I'm willing to get the conversation started. But sometimes that intimidates other people. And I think it's one of those things where, again, ground rules, understanding that, having that common language, but those kinds of things. And again, a platform that'll facilitate that is super important. And I love something that we talked about right before the show, where, because online collaboration, you can see who's doing whatever, at any given time, but talk a little bit about how you could enable somebody to give anonymous content or edit something anonymously or give their opinions. Even though we have that safety of people are allowed to do those things, sometimes you have to kind of put up the cone of silence to allow them to do those things.
Yeah. You want me to go, John, and describe that a little bit? So Mural is a digital whiteboard. You can access it right through your browser, and everything's saved to the cloud, and multiple people are adding content in a visual way at the same time. So you can actually, it's great because you can actually see and feel there's a presence there. You can see other people's activity. But like you said, that might be intimidating at points. So we actually built in some features thinking about psychological safety to actually do things like hide your cursor, but also hide your content until you reveal it, so that you're not influencing the other person or, afraid to be putting something out there that's super public, because the Mural canvas was developed to be very egalitarian. Everybody's in there together and you can kind of see everything. But then there are features where you might want to hold that back. And it's little moments like that, to Ryan's point that he was bringing out at the beginning. It's small little moments like that will open up certain people who might be, afraid otherwise to speak out. It's like, okay, nobody's going to see you in this moment, right? We also have a voting feature, by the way, dot voting. Maybe awesome. You've done this in brainstorming sessions, right? When you do this in person, there's a gravity towards two things. One is the highest person paid in the room. Everybody wants to put their dots on that, or the horse race, the one that's already winning, right? Yep. So our dot voting is anonymous. So you actually don't get that. So you actually get kind of the more authentic vote that is not going to be influenced by the group. So there are features like that we've built into our platform, thinking about human dynamics and how people interact with each other, to either kind of turn that off, turn that on, or turn that off, to help create psychological safety in different ways. And that gives people like Ryan, who facilitates sessions, that gives him the option to be plenary or private, right? And get the content all out or get it out, in a more safe, quote unquote, safe mode.
Yeah, I'd
love to hear.
Oh, I'm sorry, please.
No, go ahead, Jason.
I was going to say, we just did an in-person voting session with the dots last week. And it was funny because I was going up to take my turn and I was like, oh, this one doesn't have any votes, but I really liked it. So I didn't bother voting for that one. I kind of went with the consensus.
It was going to lose,
cool
right?
That fixes that. John, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah,
Well,
I'd love to hear John touch in on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think, the features that Jim was describing, it'd be easy to think, oh, that's just code. Those are just pixels. It's just a little feature in a piece of software, and not recognize how much thought and engineering went into that. And it's not code writing; it's social engineering, cognitive engineering. Like there are, these are disciplines that help us understand how humans react to things, how we collaborate and engage with others, how our state of mind is affected by things in our environment. And it's really those considerations that led to these features and some of the techniques that we teach people how to use. Ryan and team are bringing to people around the world that that help us perform in exceptional ways. But it's easy to miss it. If you walk by a team of people doing human-centered design or design thinking, it's easy to look at that and say, well, that's not serious. They're having too much fun and they're just moving Post-it notes around or something like that. It's easy to sort of dismiss it as not serious and miss the fact that there's actually sophisticated things at work there. And that the techniques that we're using are actually very sophisticated. They're designed to be accessible and fun and easy for people to learn and to use. And so the interface to those techniques is simple, but that is designed to be that way, right? But behind the scenes, it's there's a lot of sophisticated engineering at play that has a significant effect on how we can perform individually and as a team. And it's analogous to how anti-lock brakes work. Right, the interface to anti-lock brakes couldn't be more simple. It's just a pedal, and the driver just presses it. Right, that's it. Behind that pedal, though, is a lot of sophisticated engineering, right? That affect how the brakes work, how the tires rotate, and all those things, all designed to keep us safe. Right.
No,
but the only thing you don't have to know any of that engineering or even be aware that it exists. You just have to hit that pedal. And these techniques that we teach people, these practices are like that, right? They are designed to be accessible, simple, easy to use. You don't have to have a design background to use them. So they're designed that way. But there's a lot of engineering behind the scenes, social, cognitive, that provides safety for all of us and allow us to perform in the best way. So that's the thing I would make sure. Hopefully everybody recognizes that, like, don't just because it's fun doesn't mean it's not serious. It's very serious.
Yeah.
No, and
I love that, John, because it's I think sometimes we forget about the social sciences that we use to come up with a lot of these methods. And even John likes to talk about the steal someone's language, like the idea of just, instead of verbally speaking an idea, putting it down on a Post-it or writing it down and no one's sure where it came from. It's like we move to the merit of the idea or the problem statement or the thing because it's out there and exists in space away from a person. It's kind of like, I love the way Jake Knapp and his team, they're famous for like the 1 week design sprint. And one of the interesting things that they do, one method is they do this thing I believe they call it a gallery walk, where their ideas are up and you don't get to present your idea. Like it's the ideas are on their own. You go around and you're saying, hey, we like this, we have questions about this. Because what we found is, like, sometimes a group like this who maybe does public speaking more often, very comfortable at presenting their ideas. They may be extremely influential and be able to sell this idea, but guess what? It wasn't the best idea in the room. Like, it just so happened that, it was somebody who was very comfortable with that, where maybe if you're an introvert or you're not used to those kinds of things, I think we start having to be considerate of, neurodiverse participants and teammates how do we help them show up and have a good session and have equal participation in these meetings? And that's where I think even things like the focus on accessibility in your tools, Jim, where it's like, how do people who have maybe vision impairments or different impairments, how can they participate? How can we do those things? But then also when we were talking about, turning off cursors or doing some of these things, it really helps maybe people have focus issues. So I just want to double down that one of the things that I love about facilitation and psychological safety, when you look at it, is you as a facilitator have methods at your disposal to help everybody be there and everybody feel a part of what's going on and contribute, that maybe in a more boisterous room, might get lost.
Yeah, and it's diversity of perspective and neurodiversity, but it's also gender diversity and racial diversity. All of those other things start to come in to play as well too in these conversations, right?
I love it. And a global team as well. Sometimes certain sides of the team dominate the conversation and the other sides don't. I think it gives an equal playing field to those folks as well. And all of us probably facilitate quite a bit, but in the in-person stuff, we know the ground rules, we know the techniques that we want to take, but sometimes we forget, or sometimes it gets away from us. Whereas a platform that kind of has it built in, and it's hard to deviate from those things. So I think, again, there's definitely some merit. Ryan, I was thinking as I read your blog right before the show, there's probably some general things for facilitating a session, regardless of platform, digital or in person, that are good habits to kind of have, or those kinds of things. Any tips for folks out there?
Yeah. Two things I'm really into right now. And I wish I'll be curious. I'm sure my team will pay me, because what I'm very interested right now is the convergence, or blending psychology and tech. That's my big interest right now. But two things I try to do with a team as we're coming in, and it's a good reminder that sometimes, even though we're working with a client or an organization, all those people may not naturally work together and know each other. So I like to do two activities that are my favorite, that kind of build towards, feeling better about contributing and challenging. But I like to do something called suggested agreements. And I usually put forth a few of my favorites are great outcomes, come from great participation. I like to say, share the airtime, be succinct. My last two favorite ones are challenge ideas, not people. And I think I got this from John or from Luma. So John, you can tell me, but bad ideas are the kindling for inspiration. It's that whole yes and mentality. So if you think about improv, it's yes, okay, let's keep going, because even though it might not be where we wanted to, it's a great starting point. So I love doing suggested agreement, giving some, and then letting the team also bring together and say, hey, what have you guys seen? What have you experienced that you're like, man, that was a really good session? Now I think about it, is because we did these things. And then the second one, which can be, it's a lot of safety to just get there. Jim has this really cool pick your Nick Cage activity. I'll let him explain it in a second. I do something that's a little more, it's called a health check. And I say, okay, I have a vertical line. On this side is, I'm having a great day. I want to collaborate. Let's get in. And on the other side is, I am not having a great day. Independent work would be easier. I'm struggling to be here. And I ask participants just kind of hey, put a Post-it or put something. So I have a gauge of the room, because as a facilitator, with previous experience, my master's was in user research. It's I'm used to saying, okay, this person's quiet. I need to, continue to engage or call on them specifically, or find a way to pull them in. And now I'm saying, as a facilitator, if they tell me they're there, but just not having a great day, I need to let them be a little bit. And the group can also know hey, we need to kind of provide some air cover for this person and kind of step in a little more. They just might not be able to offer a lot that day. And a lot of that's coming from the recognition of personal lives and things that are going on. And just we're showing up to work, but we got some stuff going on. So those are some things I do, but I'll let Jim tell you about the Nick Cage thing, because I love it. It's something I'm probably going to steal or borrow, however you want to call it.
Yes. So we have this favorite here at MURAL, which has an infinite number of variations, but the original one was, it's a grid of 9 Nicolas Cage characters, because Nicolas Cage has had his wide-ranging roles, and they express different sentiments and emotions. You're happy, excited, frazzled. One of them just says bees underneath it, and it's the scene from the Bee movie. And what we do in MURAL is, so you have this grid. It's 12 actually, I think. and it's visual. And then what I have people do is pick a sticky note and change it to their favorite color. So already you're saying it's okay if it's okay to be yourself, right? Put your name on it and then move it over on top of this grid and just let us know what sentiment you identify with. I don't even ask them how they're feeling, Ryan. I just say, what do you identify with? Because there might be other reasons. And then as a facilitator, I'll actually kind of go around and just take note of that and say, oh, somebody's having a bees day. We've all had bees days. And I think for a facilitator, that's really important to know. But I think the other thing to remember is that I think for leaders, it's really important to be some of the first to participate in this small moment of vulnerability, right? Because psychological safety depends on having a certain degree of trust within the group, right? And we tend to think that trust starts from competence, right? If I have the best bullet points and the best arguments, everybody's going to trust. Actually, trust in a group starts with vulnerability. But you don't want to start with too much vulnerability. You don't want to come in there and tell people your life story. So the pick your nick activity is this small moment of vulnerability where it signals to the group, it's okay that we're different. It's okay that we have different favorite colors. It's okay that people are feeling different. And here's the important point. I think it gives leaders a chance to lead with vulnerability as well, too. Right. So it gives that, if you're the team lead or the manager or the hippo in the room, say, yep, I'm not feeling great, or I'm excited that I'm really excited about this, guys, because then you'll get this diverse set of perspectives that open up. So you need those little opening moments, because again, you don't want to start off with too much content or too much vulnerability. And doing something that Ryan just mentioned is just a small little window to vulnerability that gives leaders a chance to lead. Now you can do this with anything. You can do it we have some with cat pictures or superheroes or dogs. Like you can use anything as a way to just kind of declare, how's it going today? And it's fun and it's visual and it really disarms fear.
Love it.
Yeah.
And again, I think to John's earlier point, that's a funny manifestation of a lot of smart thinking underneath to kind of support that.
Oh, a quick story. We're talking to Disney and we changed it to pick your Mick. And we had 9 Mickey Mouse characters, right? So here we're going into it was a pretty high level conversation with Disney, and we do pick your Mick. The conversation went great after that. I guarantee if you do pick your Mick with folks from Disney, you're going to have a better conversation than if you don't.
Love it. Well, guys, I mean, it's been super fun. What are some thoughts? So I'd love to kind of close out with some tips for the folks that are listening. Man, I'm going to get shot in the face for not talking about the survey. I always miss the survey, even though I have it up, but here we go. So I think this is a perfect example of how we can kind of respond to this survey question, because does your organization enable digital tools to promote psychological safety was the survey question. And it's pretty split. It's yes, 38%, no, 38%, and I don't know, 25%, that's probably more of a no, I would assume. But for those folks that are out there that even if I think they probably are using some aspect of psychological safety for the yeses, there's probably a sharpen the saw or get better, or maybe they're doing that not in a physical way, but not in a virtual way. Let's give some tips for some things they need to look into. We'll start with Ryan and work our way through John and Jim.
Yeah, I think it's actually an interesting thing to see it be split. I remember in a conversation a few weeks back, the term psychological safety can be pretty new, like to a lot of folks. It was a newer thing to me a couple years ago. I think I first heard it at something some of the guys were doing down at voltage control, and I was like, oh, I got to write that down. That sounds interesting. So like, I think part of maybe the I don't knows, or the other crowd is like, it's a little meta, but how do we provide psychological safety to say, I don't know what psychological safety is. I also think it's interesting because psychological safety can exist as a leader, as a manager, as a friend, as a spouse. Like it's something on my side of the house where it's interesting psychologically, but like we're trying to pull it into the workplace, right? The big unlock is saying, we can be better as an organization. We can be more innovative if we can find ways to engage, with our peers and people around us better and more authentically. So I think that might have been why, but we saw some of those things, or maybe the no's. Maybe the votes were less about workshops, we're just in the workplace. Like, am I able to challenge the decisions of our leadership? Are there mechanisms for feedback and getting that out? But for me, I think seeing the split was also encouraging, right? That it's saying that, 2-3 years into this more remote work culture, that tools and services like, our friends here from, Mural, and Luma are provide us with mechanisms to at least get that far. But I do think we've got a journey ahead of us, as humans involved in tech and in working remotely. But for me, I see those stats as encouraging, because if you take the yeses and then you take the I don't knows, we might be able to move those more towards more yeses. But I think it's an interesting poll result.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'd say that one of the things that is going to be the challenge for organizations is not just being aware of psychological safety or aware of the benefits and believing in the benefits of it, but really figuring out how to do it. That is the challenge. Mm-hmm. So I say that the key is not to separate it from the everyday work. Don't say, oh well, we're going to just do psychological safety classes, sort of remove it as like a place you go to learn about it, and or as a moment in our projects or in our meetings of this 5 minute is for psychological safety, right? Can't be separate. It has to be woven in to our work practices, and that's important, because this is really about habit formation and behavior change. This is something that you really do have to internalize, and people will only get there through repetition, everyday use. It's not something that people will flip a switch and all of a sudden feel safe. It's in many ways it's a reciprocal thing. It's their actions lead to other people's actions that then feed back to them, and doing that at an organizational scale, it's that kind of a movement, and that takes time and repetition and confidence and positive feedback loop. So figuring out a way to weave it into everyday work practices so that it's just a part of every exchange you have, formal in a meeting with other people or casual in a hallway, or an email exchange, a Slack message, something like that. Like there are things we can do to both send and receive signals that create comfort and safety among our colleagues and for ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, psychological, it's not absolute. It's not something that you can say, we have psychological safety, we're done, right? It's actually could be there or not there in any group at any one point in time, right? So the idea of team building as a yearly retreat where we do trust falls doesn't work. And I think that's one of the changes now of digital tools. And I think John's point is absolutely correct. Think about it in small multiples. Right. And that's why I think things like pick your nick are so effective, because it takes 120 seconds to do. It's like 2 minutes. Don't tell me you don't have time to do that at the beginning of every meeting. So don't think about big team building, quarterly things and, okay, we're going to check the box on psychological safety. Think about those small things and the micro moments that you can build in there. My suggestion, though, would be to make them playful and engaging as well, too. The reason why pick your nick works is because people, it's such a shit when you show people this and you say, wait, I'm supposed to be Nicolas Cage in this moment with this. They're not thinking about even, the fact that they're declaring their emotion at that time, right? The gamification of it actually kind of gets people who are normally the folks that, fold their arms and sitting back in the room. It actually gets them out, right? So, if we're talking about psychological safety, don't say, okay, we're going to go around the room and everybody's going to tell us how they're feeling. Or, tell us one bad thing that happened to you on the weekend. Don't
be vulnerable.
Yeah, right. Like put it inside of a little moment that's engaging and inviting and playful and maybe even distracting. Like, oh yeah, I didn't even realize I did that. But do that in small ways.
Love it. And to your point, Ryan, it is perfectly okay to say you don't know what psychological safety is. Totally. I think I totally agree. And I think, guys, it's been a really cool discussion. I love this stuff, and I love progression. I love companies getting better via technology and via smart thinking and methodology. So thank you for what you do. And thanks for you guys out there for joining us today. I think, if you want to know more about what we do here at Insight, feel free to check us out at solutions.insight.com, and feel free to check out mural.io. So if you want to know what those guys do. And thank you very much for our guests today. We had a great time, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.